Hello everyone, my name is Sierra Cannon and today I will be discussing the effects of heat stress on the ruminant microbiome. I am also sick, so just bear with me as I struggle through this presentation. So with temperatures rising around the world and certain climates also experiencing increases in humidity, the already prevalent issue of heat stress in ruminants, especially cattle, is becoming worse and needs to be addressed. Due to the increase in heat stress, producers see reductions in productivity, fecundity, and the immunity of their animals. And once the productivity of these animals decrease, there is an increase in management costs and a reduction in profits, and these will begin to plague the animal livestock industry. There are various responses to heat stress from the animal that leads to changes in an animal's physiology and productivity. And these include reduced feed intake, nutrient utilization, feed efficiency, as well as a reduction in immune responses. And all of these each would have a detrimental impact on the profit that a producer sees on their own. But all together, which is what we see in heat stress conditions, these producers will see severe economic losses. So what is heat stress? Heat stress is defined as an environmental factor that negatively affects ruminants by reducing their feed efficiency intake, which leads to decreases in metabolic heat production as well as animal productivity. And there are many environmental factors that lead to heat stress conditions, and these typically include ambient temperature, relative humidity, solar radiation, and air movement. And animals typically experience heat stress when these conditions are prevalent and when their physiological mechanisms fail to counterbalance that excessive heat load. And the main symptoms of heat stress include increased body temperature, breathing rate, an increase in water intake, as well as a decrease in feed intake. And producers have two main indicators if an animal is being affected by heat stress, and that is rectal temperature as well as respiratory rate measurements. And respiration rate in particular is a good indicator of when an animal is experiencing heat stress, because in order to delineate the effects of the heat, the body will increase the respiration rate in order to expel that heat into the environment. And a study done by Contreras, Hodar, and others found that when dairy goats were exposed to heat stress conditions, they experienced increases in both respiratory rate and rectal temperature. Just to circle back around to respiratory rate, in this picture you can see this cow is panting, trying to expel that excess body heat. And this is one that a good indicator for producers because they don't have to take an immediate measurement. They're able to see this in the field and be able to give that cow extra attention. Sorry. So now we will discuss the effects that heat stress has on the microbiota, starting with the changes in metabolism that occur when a ruminant is experiencing heat stress. So metabolism is typically downregulated in heat stress conditions, which can significantly affect the microorganisms in the digestive system. A study done by Kim and others found that cattle experiencing heat stress had a decreased number of genes for fructose, mannose, starch, and sucrose metabolism being expressed. And as you can see in this picture, you can see some of the changes in gene expression and metabolism. And this is way more in detail than I'm going to go with you today, but it just kind of gives you a picture of just a few of the genetic expression and metabolism changes that are going on in the ruminant. And due to the metabolism changes within the rumen, as well as the heat stress conditions, there is a shift in the microbial population composition, which is what I will discuss next. So each microorganism, as you know, has an optimal temperature that it's able to survive and thrive in. Therefore, in heat stress conditions, when the internal body temperature is increased, the microbes that have a higher heat resistance or optimal temperature will be selected for in the rumen. Studies have also found that the duration of heat exposure can impact the microbiome of the rumen, and that heat stress results in a poorer microbial composition. In addition, in a study done by Beck and others, they evaluated the difference in the microbial communities of Hanwu steers after being exposed to heat stress conditions for 6 days. And in this study, they found that the rumen microbiome of the heat stress cattle were distinct from the other two study groups, and those other two study groups was no heat exposure and low heat exposure. In addition, they saw a decrease in the fibrolytic bacteria and an increase in lactate-producing bacteria. which, as you know, once lactate-producing bacteria begin to increase, though they will cause a major shift in the microbial community because a lot of the bacteria aren't able to survive and tolerate that very low pH, which once lactate levels increase in the rumen, that pH will drop. Moreover, another study found that an increase in those lactate-producing bacteria, they also found that and hypothesized that it was due to an increase in the dietary concentrate to roughage ratio for intake. So again, you see that feed intake those intake differences, which can shift that microbial population even more and increase those lactate-producing bacteria, which again will decrease the pH. Moreover, this study found that heat stress conditions led to a decrease in acetate-producing Acetobacter, which is also known to take up environmental oxygen in order to maintain the anaerobic environment for the ruminal microbes. So that can have a big impact on the composition as well, because all of these environmental changes are happening, and you're selecting for different microbes depending on which environment they're having to tolerate, whether that be low pH, high temperature, a little more aerobic because you're not having those acetobacters pulling the oxygen out. So you're really seeing a lot of changes in the microbial composition of the rumen due to this heat stress impact. And in this diagram, you can see the interwoven impacts between the microbial population, their composition, and their metabolites. And across these studies, it can be seen that heat exposure does shift the composition and decreases the diversity of the microbial population, while also disturbing the metabolic pathways in the rumen. So, one way researchers have found to alleviate the heat stress is heat tolerance. So studies have found that there are ruminants that are more tolerant to heat stress than others, which opens doors for genetic selection of heat-tolerant ruminants. And heat-tolerant ruminants have been found to have a superior thermoregulatory capacity and a decreased response to experiencing heat stress conditions. And in many different studies, heat-tolerant ruminants had a lower respiratory rate and rectal temperature, a different expression of metabolites, and a higher microbial species richness when compared to heat-sensitive ruminants exposed to the same heat stress conditions. Holstein and Jersey cows have been compared in this way, with Jersey cows being considered a more tolerant breed, which is why they are seen here. And moreover, other studies have highlighted the differences in feed intake and gene regulation between heat-tolerant and heat-sensitive ruminants. However, more research is needed in these areas. Breeding and genetic selection for those ruminants that are heat-tolerant seems to be the best solution and cost-benefit option in which producers can alleviate the effects of heat stress in their herds so that animal productivity can continue to be improved. In conclusion, heat stress continues to affect ruminant productivity each day and will only continue to have increasing effects as global temperatures continue to rise. Producers have been known to say that heat stress is one of the largest obstacles to animal productivity today, and as you know, as animal productivity decreases, the economic losses for producers will continue to increase. Therefore, it is imperative that researchers understand the effects of heat stress, especially on the microbiome and the physiology of the animal, and they should continue to utilize the information they find to create ways to alleviate those negative effects to help out producers. And these are my references.